Hi everyone, my name is Lee Boonstra and I'm a developer advocate for Google. And I'm focusing mainly on conversational AI, which within Google, that's Dialogflow, conversational AI as in contact centers, and also speech technology. I've been at Google since 2017 and I work as a chatbot expert with businesses, but I also work a lot with engineers and I'll collect feedback from customers and I give that back to the engineering team. And I present a lot on conferences. I'm also actually the writer of the book, The Definitive Guide to Conversational AI with Dialogflow and Google Cloud. I wrote this book for Apress and I will refer a couple of times in my presentation to this book because I wrote down the materials there in depth. All right, so I think we've all experienced it once before. You're talking to a chatbot, whether that's via text chat or maybe it's a voice chatbot via the Google Assistant, and your chatbot doesn't know what to answer. It returns a fallback, or maybe even worse, it returns the wrong answer. Uh, that is bad customer experience, of course. When this happens too much, you have the risk that your visitors are not coming back anymore because they think that the chatbot doesn't work. As a matter of fact, often these chatbots do work, but they were trained on different types of data and to give different types of answers. And one way is that if you just have good conversational design, you wouldn't experience this problem. But as a matter of fact, you can't just assume that the conversation will always go as the way it was designed. And here's the thing, what I noticed while working with customers at Google is that many businesses, when I ask them like, oh, what are you doing for chatbot analytics? Then they always tell me like, yeah, that's on the planning. We want to do that maybe in the third or fourth iteration of the project. And then I always ask them, well, aren't you too late with doing so? What you want to do is you want to go live as soon as possible with your chatbot and start capturing all the data that your users are telling to the chatbot, because that is the way how you can learn from the conversations and you can see like what types of conversations am I missing in order to complete and create a better user experience. So here's what I did. I create many chatbot dashboards in the past before, and I know exactly the data points that you want to capture. And I group them in a couple of sub categories. Like you have the conversational related metrics, you have the funnel metrics, and then you have also the metrics that are more checking the bot health. Let's dive into the first category, the conversational related metrics. What is that? Well, basically that gives you the answer on like what was said by who, when, and where. So the types of data points that you want to collect here, of course, will be the session ID, because with the session ID, you make a chat transcript unique. So all the chats from one user to the chatbot, those are collected in a session, and you can find that back through a session ID. When you work with tools like Dialogflow, they will always return you the session ID of the conversation. And with that session ID, you can find a transcript back. Often you need then a date and timestamp to figure out when that conversation happened, but also in order to sort it on date time. So, like this was the very first message with happened to the chatbot, and this was the last one, and you can collect the full session length that way. The other thing that you want to collect is the sentiment score. This is for if you want to figure out like if your users were happy or unhappy. And we do that based on text. So even if it's a voice chatbot, you want to get the transcribed text. And based on that, you can get sentiment detection. So you get a value back between +1 or -1 to figure out like if the sentiment was good or bad. You want to also capture things like keywords and language. You want to know like, oh, are my, like if you want to find a transcript for a Portuguese user, and you can search on the language Portuguese, and then you can search for a particular keyword, and that way you can easily find the transcript back. And the last type of data that I would definitely collect, these are the intent detection information. So when you use tools like Dialogflow, you will get back information from the system, from the bot builder, that tells you if the intent was matched, if it was a correct match, or if it was a fallback, like if the chatbot couldn't find the right answer, and if it's the end of the interaction. Because with that, you can really figure out like what went wrong or what went well. And we'll talk about that more in a later moment. Let me show you one demo of a dashboard that I've built in the past, and I've created a chatbot for web, and I've created a chatbot. The same chatbot works also on voice on the Google Assistant, and you will see the types of data points that I'm using here. So when you have a look, um, so here you see a banking portal that I created. It's a fake banking portal. Obviously, it's not a real website. But I created like a textual chat. I'm talking to the chatbot, and I said I want to transfer some money, and it asked me for my IBN number, and what was the amount you want to transfer. I say 200 euros. And what was the destination country? The destination is Brazil. All right, the money will be transferred. This is a particular flow that worked in my chatbot. And now let's dive to the dashboard. The dashboard, I created this with BigQuery in the backend as a data warehouse, and I just designed my own HTML page with a dashboard. And what you can see in this dashboard is that I, over time, collected over 1,100 chatbot messages, and 217 of these chatbot messages had a negative sentiment. So these are people that were unhappy. And if I look into the negative responses and I sorted them all, you can really see like a bunch of very negative intents happening together with the session ID. So I could search on the session ID in order to find back the transcript to figure out what went wrong. Here I'm sorting on all the fallback intents, so I can also find out like what went wrong here. In this case, why did the chatbot fail? Now, what you could do then, once you have everything stored in a data warehouse like BigQuery, you can basically run a query under the hood where you say like, well, from the chatbot messages table, give me every chatbot message where the session ID equals this session ID, and that I wrote this here, and then sort on date and time. And when you do that, you'll get the transcript, as what you can see here. So you can see exactly what has been asked. This user got really angry. And he asked about this salary, like, did my salary came in today? And the chatbot didn't know what to answer. It said, sorry, what was that? My salary, when will I receive it? Again, chatbot didn't know the right answer. It was again a fallback intent. And then at some point, the user got really angry. He said, I'm really annoyed. And that is the moment when you see that you get like a very negative sentiment score, like minus 0.8 or 80%. So that's obviously wrong. And what did I learn from these data? Well, first of all, when users are angry, my chatbot doesn't know how to handle that, because like the least thing that I could do is I could go back into Dialogflow and create an intent that has some kind of a happy flow that helps users, or even better, maybe does a handoff to a human where the user picks up the phone and talks to an employee. But I think the biggest learning of this all is that my banking chatbot apparently doesn't know the use case of customers that ask about salaries, like when did the salary came in. And that is what I learned from this data. So I could go back into my bot builder tool like Dialogflow and start creating those intents. So what we've seen in this demo is you've seen me filtering on sentiment scores to figure out if the customer was happy or unhappy. You've seen me going through a full transcript, and I did that with the session ID and a date timestamp. And also I wanted to improve the user experience, and I did that by collecting the intent detection information, like if it was a fallback or not, or where did it wrong. And the way how I would build that, it wasn't that difficult actually. The thing is, you need access to the SDK. So for Dialogflow has an SDK for developers, and you can integrate that in your chatbot platform, whether that's a web chatbot or voice, and you can collect every message with the session ID. And what I did is I passed it to the DLP API within Google Cloud, so I can remove sensitive information like passport numbers and phone numbers, because of regulations I might not want to store that in my data warehouse. And then I'm passing it to the natural language API so I can detect the sentiment detection, the scores. And then I'm storing it in the in BigQuery in the data warehouse. And that is the way when I can filter on it and I can attach it to a dashboard, or I can go back to a bot builder like Dialogflow to fix the intent and fix the use case. Now, I also mentioned in my I also mentioned in my demo or in my slides that what you want to collect is keywords information, because it can be very handy to figure out like what types of keywords are users using in their conversations, and you can do that with past data. And Google actually created a new tool which is called cciInsights. And it was a tool that mainly we created in first place for contact centers to collect the call drivers of a call. But you can use it with Dialogflow and chatbots as well. And it's a very great tool for figuring out like what kind of topics have been discussed, what were the keywords. And it's a new tool of Google. I'm going to show you how that works. Let's dive into the video.
Get started by using cciInsights. First, enable the Insights API. You will find a link on the Conversational Hub page when you start Insights for the first time. This will take a few seconds before you can get started. For importing, you will also need to enable the speech-to-text and Google Cloud Storage APIs. The first thing you will have to do is to import the conversations to your cciInsights. In a production environment, you will likely have insights integrated with your virtual agent and contact center system that pushes the conversations via the API in real time to insights. However, it's also possible to import existing datasets manually. Your conversation will need a specific JSON format, which defines the text, the timestamp, the user ID, and the role. Once the conversation is imported, you can dive into the conversation and press the Analyze button. This will analyze your conversation transcript and annotate the bits of the conversation, such as the locations, the persons, or the objects. Clicking on these entities will highlight the parts of the conversation where those entities were mentioned. An Insights topic model uses Google natural language processing to generate primary topics for each conversation in your dataset. You can deploy the model to analyze future conversations as they're imported. To train your own model with a good accuracy, you will need a minimum of 10,000 conversations. And then you can start the training. Smart highlights automatically detect highlights through keywords and/or phrases in your conversation without requiring additional configuration. Smart highlights draws from various possible scenarios to detect highlights, such as asking to hold, ensuring that an issue was resolved, a complaint, and much more. As you have seen in this demo, Insights enables businesses to hear what customers are saying to make data-driven business decisions and increase operational efficiency.
All right, so we now have seen like the conversational related metrics. Now we'll dive into the funnel metrics. So these are all things about the conversation path that it took, how your users were engaging with the virtual agent. So that means that you want to have insights on the session flow. And when you think of a session flow, the main thing that you want to capture is the total usage, where that is the percentage of all the users that were matching all your intents. And what's also important here is the completion rate or the success rate, which basically means like a percentage of the users that completed the full flow. So all that completed the happy flow. And if they did not complete the happy flow, then you're curious on where they dropped off. So the drop off place and the drop off rate. You want to know like how many people did not complete the flow and where did they left the conversation, on which intent. Because that could mean that there's something wrong, that your intent doesn't have enough training data. If you see that 60% of the people did not stopped on a particular intent, then you know like there might be something wrong there. So you will have a look. Now, the session flow, that is something that you can see in tools like Dialogflow. It basically gets that information from chat-based. But there are a couple of other Google tools that you might want to use in order to get more information about the conversation paths. One of these things is the user retention. And retention, that is actually like you want to know if your users made a habit of your bot. When you have the Google Assistant, you can find this retention information in the actions on Google Console. But when your bot is available on web, you might want to look into the Google Analytics tools. And what's important here is, I mean, you can imagine that if you build a chatbot for a retailer where you add items to a shopping cart, that obviously has a higher retention rate than when you create like a joke app for the Google Assistant. Because joke app, yeah, you hear the joke once and you probably never visit the chatbot back because you know the joke. Where if you have a shopping app, yeah, you probably always want to continue shopping, and that's also the reason why. For a Google Assistant, for example, retailer apps often are very popular. So user retention is something that you want to capture. You want to figure out like, how can I have my users stay with my brand and come back every time? Discovery is also important, and you want to figure out like, how did my users find my chatbot? Did they find it for web? Then you can find this information in the Google Search Console. And if they use the Google Actions, then you want to find this in the Actions on Google Console. We display that in dashboards. Now, the last topic that I would like to discuss with you, these are the bot model health metrics. And this is all about the machine learning model that tools like Dialogflow use under the hood. Are they working as they were designed? So when you look into AI bot builders, like Dialogflow, the way how they work is they work through intent matching, which means under the hood, they build a machine learning model. Now, UX conversational designers, they would create intents where they pass in training phrases to train the machine learning model and to train utterances. Now, the way how it works is that when an end user communicates with the chatbot, it will find an intent based on the highest intent score, the confidence score or threshold. The one with the highest score, the intent with the highest score, that's the intent that will return the answer. And it's based on the data that it was trained on. So when we talk about metrics, we want to know, and these are all like machine learning terms, but we want to know the true positives, the true negatives, false positives, and false negatives. And I'm going to tell you exactly how that looks for a chatbot. Because a true positive, we call that also a supported request, is basically the outcome where the chatbot correctly detected the right positive intent. So imagine if I go into Dialogflow and I created an intent and I trained it with, has my salary been paid? Have I received my salary? Then I expected that the salary intent will be returned. So if the user says my salary, when will I receive it? I expected it to be the salary intent, and it detected also the salary intent. So that's a true positive. Everything fine. Another thing that's fine, that's a true negative. That means an unsupported request, or what we developers always say, like, well, works as designed. That means basically it's an outcome where the chatbot correctly mapped the outcome to a fallback because the feature wasn't developed, works as designed. So that means, for example, I created an intent, or like I know that this intent wouldn't be mapped. Everything that cannot be mapped will be forwarded to a global fallback. If a user types in my banking portal, did I save enough money to buy a car? Obviously, we don't know the answer, so we expect it to return the global fallback, and it did detect the global fallback, so all good. Now, let's have a look into some negative examples. A false positive, for example. A false positive, that means a misunderstood request. And that is an outcome where the chatbot matches it to the wrong intent. It should have been a different intent, or in case it didn't exist, it should have been the fallback intent. But something went wrong here. So, and this is a scenario that you might be familiar with if you are using bot building tools like Dialogflow. I'm sure you have seen examples like this. You create two intents. Let's say I have, for my banking portal, I have created one intent. It's called block card, where I trained it with phrases like, I want to block my card. And I created a second intent where I say, I want to renew my card. That's the renew card intent. And then you have the test data or the end user that communicates with your chatbot, and it says like, my account is blocked. Can I get a new card? You expect it to be renew card because it's all about renewing cards, but instead it returned blocked card because somehow the word blocked weighed higher in this sentence and it returned the wrong intent. This is a false positive. It means there are probably not enough training data. You can solve this problem by providing enough training data so that the next time, this wouldn't be a false positive. Then we have false negatives. We call that also missed request. And that is an outcome where the intent exists, but the chatbot didn't detect it, and therefore a fallback was triggered. So imagine that I created the salary intent where I say with the training phrase like, when will I receive my salary? The user that communicated with the chatbot asked, when will I get paid? It should be the salary intent, but instead it returned a fallback. Again, probably not enough training data or something went wrong there. Now that you know these types, these false positives and false negatives, then it's nice to know that based on that, you can calculate true positive rates, a sensitivity ratio that we call also a recall, that you can use to determine if intents are too narrowly defined or if these are missed requests. And when it's above 0.5, then you can consider it as good. So a true positive rate, or TPR, the way how you calculate that is the total of all the TPs divided by the total of TPs plus the total of false negatives. And the same we can do for a false positive rate, so an FPR. We could say an FPR is the total of false positive divided by the total false positives plus total false negatives. Let me give you an example so you understand this better. Let's say you have 5 correctly detected intents and there's one missed request. Then your recall would be 5 divided by 5 plus 1 is 0.8, which is a higher recall than when you would have 5 correctly detected intents and 7 missed request intents, because then you would have 5 divided by 5 plus 7 is a 0.4 sensitivity. Everything above 0.5 is good. And these type of rates you want to plot on a curve where you put the TPRs against the false positive rate. And then here's the trick. The steeper the line, the better. I mean, this will show you in first glance if everything goes well or if it's not going right. And that means like if things aren't going well, that you might want to go into your machine learning settings of Dialogflow, for example, where you can change the threshold score to make sure that you have a better confidence level. Tools like that are also like confusion metrics, where you plot it on a metric scale, where the true positive and negatives are observations of the correctly detected ones, where in my case, these are the green ones, and then the false positives and false negatives are red. And you can see this here on the screen. You can immediately see where it goes wrong, because what's correct here is the orange line, and everything that goes wrong are like highlighted red. So in this example, you can see that the default global welcome intent had 13 matches in orange that were correct. So 13 times it mapped it to the welcome intent. You look on the X and Y axis. But it went once wrong, because once, if you look, you'll see that the by product intent was matched. So there is something wrong with the training data. You can see that on one glance. Now, if you think like this type of information is super handy and handy for my company or business, or I want to learn more about that, I wrote a white paper that you all can download. I wrote this together with the DDMA, which is the Dutch Voice Task Force, where we want to bring more brands to use voice for their brandings. Or you can obviously read my book and read more about conversational related metrics, chat session and funnel metrics with tools like Chatbase or BigQuery, and the machine learning models. So everything on how does Dialogflow works under the hood, and how can I use that to optimize my customer experience. Because you'll only learn from your users' data. So go live immediately with your chatbot, look into the data, and start improving your chatbots. Thank you.